Good day and welcome to Radamanth Music. What is the average age of a band at the peak of their creative output? This is something that I've often thought about. All my favourite bands made their best music when they were very young, and I want to know at what age exactly do bands just work best? So I decided to just do the research and answer the question definitively. I have researched 21 bands, and I'll be going through them in chronological order. Obviously, the period during which a band is at their peak is highly subjective, so if you think I'm wrong about when exactly any of them were at their creative peak, leave a comment below and share your own thoughts. Let's get into it. I dated the creative peak of the Beatles from Revolver rather than Rubber Soul, because although Rubber Soul is great, I don't think it's at the same level as the albums that came after it. From Revolver in 1966 to Abbey Road in 1969, the average age of a Beatle was 26. The band's first two records were both masterpieces, and unfortunately they never reached that level of greatness again for the rest of their career. From Music from Big Pink in 1968 to the Brown Album in 1969, the average age of a band member was 27 and a half. Led Zeppelin's best period is Led Zeppelin 1 in 1969 to Physical Graffiti in 1975. During this time, a band member was aged 24 and a half years old on average. I've dated Pink Floyd's peak from Dark Side of the Moon in 1973 to The Wall in 1979. During this peak period, the average age of a band member was 34. It is particularly difficult to place Queen's peak era because they were writing amazing songs all the way up until Freddie Mercury died, but I think they were at their absolute best from Queen 2 in 1974 to News of the World in 1977. The band's average age at this time was 27. Fleetwood Mac released Self-Titled in 1975 and Tusk in 1979, during which time a band member was 30 years old on average. The average age of Aerosmith was only 24 from Get Your Wings in 1974 to Rocks in 1976. The golden age of Metallica is generally thought of as being from 1983, when they came onto the scene with their debut album Kill 'Em All, up to the Black Album in 1991. Their average age during this period was 24. After a solid debut album, Motley Crue put out Shout at the Devil in 1983, and in 1989 released their best album, Dr. Feelgood. The average age of the band members in these peak years is 27 and a half. I've always preferred REM's 90s material to their 80s material, and so placed their peak era as being from Out of Time in 1991 to their last album, Up, in 1998. The albums REM made after Up never happened. REM's average age from 91 to 98 was 36. I can't imagine there would be much controversy in placing the Pixies' peak from Come On Pilgrim in 1987 to Bossa Nova in 1990, which gives the band an average age of 25 during their best years. Nirvana's creative peak is Nevermind and In Utero. The average age of a band member from 1991 to 1993 was 25. After an interesting debut album, Blur released Modern Life is Rubbish in 1993 and four more excellent albums that same decade. Appropriately, Blur's age of greatness came to an end with the release of their best album, 13, at the close of the 90s. The band was aged 28 years old on average during these years. The Smashing Pumpkins' masterpiece, Siamese Dream, was released in 1993. Their next masterpiece, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, was released 2 years later. The band members were aged, on average, 27 during these years. After Melancholy, the original band lineup never made a record together again. Britpop band Pulp's creative peak consisted of 3 albums in the 90s, His and Hers in 1993, Different Class in 1995, and 1998's This Is Hardcore, a truly great album which, in my opinion, has not received the full recognition it deserves. The average age of the band during those 3 albums is 31 and a half years old. After their seminal imitation grunge debut album, Pablo Honey, Radiohead released The Bends in 1994, and in 2007 brought a period of creative output almost unmatched in the history of popular music to an end with the release of In Rainbows. During this 13-year period, the average Radiohead member was aged 32. Most Oasis fans would probably consider the band's peak to be their first 2 albums, but for this I'm going to make a stand. I believe that Standing on the Shoulder of Giants is an unsung masterpiece, and I'm thus dating Oasis's peak up to 2000. From Definitely Maybe in 1994 to Standing on the Shoulder of Giants in 2000, the average band member was aged 27 and a half years old. After a solid debut album, Muse decided to be one of the best bands in the world and released Origin of Symmetry in 2001, following it up with two more masterworks, 2003's Absolution and 2006's Black Holes and Revelations, after which Muse decided to stop being a good band. Muse were aged 25 on average during their peak years. The Killers burned fast and bright. Their debut album was arguably the best debut in rock history. The follow-up, Sam's Town, although not as good, was still great. The average age of a Killer during this early peak was 27. Although the band did release some albums between Sam's Town and their Redemption album, Wonderful Wonderful, I like to think that those intermediary albums never happened. Another band with an amazing debut album that they never quite matched afterward, Arcade Fire. Funeral was released in 2004 and their output remained solid up to Reflector in 2013. The band had an average age of 30 during this time. So, according to my research, the age of a band when they are at the height of their creative powers is 28.